But today, we've got Josep Parés Casanova, and he's here today to talk to us about magnetostratigraphy and the first human occupations in the Western Mediterranean. So with that, I will stop my sharing and I will pass it over to Josep, who can share his screen.
All right, well, welcome everyone. Thanks for being here. I'll need to shorten a little bit the talk. I realize that 30 minutes might be a little bit too much for the information. Anyway, this is the topic I'm gonna talk about, magnetostratigraphy, and how it helped to resolve this long-standing question on the earliest, the oldest human occupations in the Western Mediterranean. So the topic, it's quite well illustrated in this slide. This is a long, very long-standing question in paleoanthropology. We agree, or there's a general agreement, that the human lineage somewhat begins in the East Africa, in the area of the rift, but obviously at some point humans start to migrate out of the continent, either through the north, through the southern Arabian Peninsula, and at some point they occupy, so to speak, or they settle in the old world, in Europe. And so the question of when that happened, it's still pending. And that's why I like to illustrate this problem with these two slides here. On the top right, you can see the famous footprints found in Laetoli, Tanzania. Footprints made by hominids about 3.5 million years ago, as opposed to the footprints down below made on the moon in 1967, if I remember correctly. So we're trying to put a little bit of information of this gap of more than 3 million years between these two famous footprints. So as I just said, the journey, the story starts here in this African rift, where we certainly find we have well-documented human presence back to almost 4 million years ago. I just mentioned the footprints in Laetoli. You have probably of Lucy, the skeleton almost entire that was found as well, and chronology around 3.5 or so. And stone tools, some of them have been dated to 2.5 million years. Nevertheless, in Europe, until the mid-90s, the wisdom, or the conventional wisdom, was that there was no human occupation, human presence in Europe before 500,000 years ago. All right, and in this map, you can see some of the localities, let's call it classic traditional localities as far as human evolution or human sites, because they either contain human fossils or stone tools, lithic tools, as we call them, which document, anyway, the presence of humans. This was called the short chronology hypothesis back in 1994, a hypothesis that, ironically, in 1995, we dismantled when we showed human presence in the cul-de-sac of Europe in Spain almost twice as far as chronology than these traditional or classic sites in Europe. I'll be mentioning briefly some dating methods, specifically luminescence. This is in Spanish, of course, and ESR, electron spin resonance. I'm not going to get into many details, but I'll be happy to answer whatever I can. And those are techniques that we have used as well to support the paleomagnetism, which, as we know, it's not a dating tool per se, but it can provide through magnetostratigraphy extremely useful timelines that by correlation we can use to date sedimentary rocks. So that's in essence the game in here. So for that reason, I'm going to talk about 3 sites in the Western Mediterranean that so far they document the most solid evidence for human presence in the early Pleistocene. Atapuerca and Orce in Spain, north and south respectively, and then at the very northern tip of Africa in Argelia, a site which is called Ain Hanech. And so I'll start with this site in North Africa. And the localities are known as Hanech and Haim Buchirit. This is found in the northern part of the country in Algeria. There's other sites that I'm not going to mention in this talk. It's in a nutshell, this is a large sedimentary basin developed during the Pliocene and Pleistocene. In this slide, you can see in the background the highlights, if you will, the uplift made of Mesozoic rocks for the most part. And this is just one small part of this alluvial-Palastrian-Lacustrian basin. You can see the sedimentary rocks here, well exposed, flat-lying, no tectonic complexities. And this is basically the sedimentary basin that we studied because it contains fossils, not only, so mostly mammal fossils or non-human mammal fossils, but also lithic tools. And to the right, you can see a detail of this excavation in Hanech, which has been carried out actually since the 40s. So it's a long known site, but not until recently we had the opportunity to put an age to the remains. So I mentioned in this locality, we haven't found yet human fossils. Nevertheless, we do have presence of hominids because the lithic tools like these beautiful mode 1 stone tools that you can see on the slide. So this is just an image of ourselves sampling these sections. The fact that bedding is horizontal and the climate it's so dry, it helps in a way. On the other hand, we have to dig a lot to get rid of weathered sediments until we reach the fresh bedrock to take samples every 2-3 meters, depending on the lithology. Sediments, for the most part, are clays, silts. There's some conglomerates, not sampled for paleomagnetism, of course. And occasionally we find some carbonatic or carbonates, Palastrian layers, like the ones you can see on this slide. Now, we need somewhat an independent tool to match our binary code, paleomagnetism, to the GPTS. As all of you know, this is a long-standing question as well. We unfortunately produce only a sequence of binary codes, normal and reverse polarity in the best scenario. So ideally, we need another tool independent to somewhat anchor our results to the GPTS. So in this case, we use the electron spin resonance, ESR, in the community. Without getting too much in detail, but just so you can follow a little bit, this is based on quartz grains. And quartz is present in almost every single sedimentary layer. As you'll see later on, we've been working for years in cave deposits, and there's a decent or at least measurable amount of quartz grains in caves. Basically, the method can be contemplated as a paleodosimetric dating. So it's a paleodosimeter, if you will, similar to the ones that people use in the hospital to measure the low doses of radioactivity. On the one hand, we need to determine the equivalent dose. That's what we do in the lab. And for that, basically, what we do is to irradiate the sample with a known dose, and we measure with an spectrometer the damage, if you will, that we produce on the quartz grains. The crystal defects, if you will, that are produced by these low doses of radioactivity. That means that in the field, we have to measure this small, low radioactivity, and that's what we call the dose rate. When we know both things, we can estimate the last exposure of the grains to the sunlight, as this is how the clock restarts, gets back to zero. Paleomagnetism, I guess I don't have to explain much in here. I just feel like including some examples of demagnetization diagrams of these clays and silts of this site in North Algeria. Generally speaking, sediments are quite well behaved, either AF or thermal demagnetization works to isolate the primary signal. And you can see here some examples of normal polarity, some reverse polarity, some samples with a normal overprint plus the reverse polarity, and quite dispersion here on the stereographic projection, yet enough quality to determine normal and reverse crowns. Okay, so hysteresis loops in here. All rocks, not surprised, they're dominantly paramagnetic, yet they have some small fraction of ferromagnetism, which is where we are able to measure and use for our paleomagnetic purposes. I keep pushing the wrongs. Okay, so we calculate the latitude of the VGP for each sampled horizon, and that's the diagram that you can see in here. VGP latitude versus stratigraphic depth, and this is change or transform in terms of reverse and normal polarity, as you can see in this first diagram, and we correlate that to the GPDS. In this case, as mentioned before, we have the ESR ages. I'll show them in a second, but you can see the result in here of this ESR on quartz grains of 1.9 plus minus 0.18. This is the lithostratigraphy. You can see also here the levels where we find mode 1 tools, as well as in the upper part where we see some more modern, elaborated, if you will, tools, which are known as Acholian at the very top of the section. So we determined that we have two layers, one of around 1.9 and around 2.4 million years artifacts. And so this is for those less familiar with the topic, this is huge, because until now, only in the East African Rift, we were able to find similar chronologies or tools, human presence with similar chronologies. So in here, we are thousands of kilometers northwest of the East African Rift, at the cul-de-sac, if you will, upside down, of the African continent, yet finding human presence pretty much coeval to the classic or some of the classic human sites in East Africa. Now, we can take a step forward here and use our magnetic reversal stratigraphy, and specifically the main polarity changes, which are shown here with these red spots. This is the top of Gauss with Matuyama. This is the base and the top of Olduvai, to estimate a gross average sedimentation rate. All right, so in here we don't take into account any possible compaction, the loss of water, yada yada, but just to have an overall idea. So from that we can extrapolate the ages of these tools as shown in here, which are consistent with the ESR age dating, and that's where the two ages come from, 1.9 and around 2.4. Again, using this rough estimate of the sedimentation rate. All right, we're gonna move actually to the southern tip of Europe in Spain. And first of all, I'm gonna talk about the site, Atapuerca, which is located in the province of Burgos, in the northern part of the country. And in a nutshell, the archaeological excavations have going on since 1978. Every year, the site has been excavated. It was designated a World Heritage Site in 2000 by the UNESCO. So far is the most abundant and oldest evidence for human presence in Europe, in the form of both human bones and tools, as we'll see in a second. But specifically for the Middle Pliocene, so say 300,000 years ago, it contains the best collection and most complete of human fossils. And so far we have found more than 28 individuals in a chamber that it's not more than, 8 or 9 square meters in the cave. The findings allowed us to define a new human species, Homo antecessor, based on about 180 human fossil remains, which you can see in this slide. And as far as the stone tools, the indirect way that shows human presence and their technology level, so to speak, we find the primitive stone tools called Oloan, Mode 1, the Acheulean, the bifaces, Isaacs, and so forth, Mode 2, and Mousterian tools, or known as well of Mode 3. So the site is it's close to the Basque Country, to the northern margin of Spain, close to the Cantabrian Sea, in the northern part of the plateau, where the topography is basically flat. We are in a foreland basin, in the Ebro Basin, so mostly made up by Cenozoic rocks. But every now and then there's some distinctive, almost rolling hills like the one you see on the slide. And this is exactly what we see. Well, this is exactly the Atapuerca Range. It's a small mountain range produced by Cretaceous limestones. The uplift is due to the alpine orogeny, and it's made up of Cretaceous limestone. Is this little island here, if you will, in green, surrounded by the Cenozoic rocks in between the Pyrenees to the north and the Iberian Range to the southeast. This is an aerial view of this, I would call it discrete mountain range, almost northwest, southeast veering. And the sites we're going to look, they're located in the southeast edge or the slopes, the southwest slopes of the mountain range. All right, so this is pretty much due to an old railway that was built. It started actually in the late 1800s, and the purpose was to move coal and iron minerals from the Iberian Range to, well, eventually to Bilbao, in the Basque Country, and from there to the UK. It was a British company who ordered to build this railway. So thanks to this trench, like you can see a segment on this slide to the right, the trench cut a number of cavities, basically a cave system, which most of them were filled with sediments, cave sediments, which in turn they contain a number of fossiliferous layers with archaeological material and a lot of paleontological remains. Those are just some illustrations to show the works back in the late 19th century with one of the machines that worked there. The railway was functioning for a few years, shortly after the First War started, and then pretty much was shut down. But the trench, this natural section or beautiful outcrop for us geologists, stayed there. We recently compiled some old existing seismic data. This is not extremely relevant, but it's important to put the big picture. And the site or the limestones are outcropping here thanks to a number of strike-slip, somewhat transpressive faults. They produce this uplift, a pop-up in the form of an anticline. This is a 3D, very simple reconstruction of the anticline, and the green layer is the Cretaceous limestones, and the sites are located right here where the start is shown. All right, so far with the geological context, this is an image of one of the walls of the trench, and we can see the typical karst features, so this illusion of the limestones, which later on they've been filled up with sediments, mostly from the outside. Another close-up, and you can see the gallery here, an opening, a cave made with or by the Cretaceous limestones. Still, we can appreciate some stalagmites or flags, as they call them, attached to the limestone. And in red, you can see the red clays and siltstones infilling the cavities. Anyway, so this site is spectacular. I can't spend much time here, but this is some of the examples that allow us to define this new species, the Homo antecessor, for which we almost have an entire face, teeth, mandible, cut marks. There is indications for cannibalism. Anyway, but that goes a little bit beyond the scope of this lecture. See, this is an example of one of these cavities, Grandolina. And there's a sedimentary infill of more than 20 meters. This is the roof of the cave, as you can see on the slide. You can see sills and fine-grained, well-stratified deposits, lots of breccias, more breccias, fine-grained deposits. And this goes down for about 10 more meters. So it's 20 or 25 meters of cave sediment of human history, if you will, recorded in this cave. All right, so I call it the beginnings because back in 1995, we found that the sediments, lower part, were for the most part reversely magnetized. So we were in the Matsuyama crown. We have normal polarity on top. And back then we found out that the human layer, it's right below the Matsuyama-Brunish boundary, immediately placing human fossils to a chronology of at least 800,000 years. So this slide, again, it's from 1995, and I want to show you a little bit how much it rained since then. This is the detail of the layer that contains the fossils. It's called a TD6. You've seen this phase before. We did repeated sampling, narrow sampling, in the hope of finding other possible excursions or events. We thought at some point we found something that could be either the precursor of the Brunch or the Kamikatsura, the Santa Rosa. But either way, the important thing is that luminescence ages, as you'll see in the next slide, support the interpretation of the Matsuyama-Brunish for this boundary. Those are the first stages of luminescence, and they provide 850, 831 on this level, which is about 2 meters below the change of polarity between the reverse to normal polarity. ESR, so I didn't mention luminescence, but basically it's very similar. It's also a paleodosimetry technique. ESR in this case for TD6, the layer that contains human fossils, provided an age of 947 plus minus 90. And again, notice that the layer TD6 with such a chronology by ESR, it's about 2 meters below the Matsuyama-Brunish boundary, or we interpreted originally without chronometric ages that it was the Matsuyama-Brunish boundary. Now, later on, we pushed the envelope and we tried to obtain direct ages of fossil humans, something that it's not simple or easy. First of all, because ideally you need you need teeth, basically. And in this case, we wanted to use the real thing. So a human tooth, that's a little bit, tricky to obtain. We're talking about a little sacrifice, so to speak, of micro-milling, as you can see in this image, a fragment of human tooth to do ESR. And the ages, well, they were very, very encouraging. Notice the large dispersion. We get numbers of 721 to 852 for this human tooth or fragment, still within the Matsuyama crown. Notice that those are the VGP poles. We are in the Matsuyama crown. So those fossils are still providing a direct age for these fossils in the upper part of the Matsuyama. This has been, that we know, this has been done only one more time. So this is a great laboratory to cross-check all these methods as well. All right, but down below, the cave contains also other deposits with no fossils, phreatic faces, so slack water, waterline deposits, fine-grained deposits, nicely laminated, like this example that you can see in here. So we extended the magnetostratigraphy downwards. We found the normal crown Jaramillo. We believe that we have the Cup Mountain as well, because once we combine this with luminescence in blue or ESR, you can see the numbers here for the area of the zone where we have the Jaramillo. Sure enough, we get ages of 1 to 0.9 million years, clearly within the Jaramillo, within the error bar. And where we interpret the Cup Mountain, we are almost 1.2 million years. So you have an overall view of this sedimentary infill on one of the galleries of the cave. So we're talking about almost 25 meters in this sequence, that it goes from sterile fluviatile deposits at the bottom with a Jaramillo to faces that correspond to the entrance deposits. So talus deposits, breccias, which are the ones that contain tools at the bottom, like the one in here, and the human fossils right here in TD6. So this is the latest paper or contribution as far as the chronology. TD6 around 846 with the human fossils, but we have tools as well right before Jaramillo, therefore constrained by the Jaramillo itself, and some, ESR ages of around 1 million years. So if you ever go to the Museum of Human Evolution, which actually was due to a large extent to this site, you'll see a reconstruction of these neo-hominin species, and eventually all these produced, well, the building where myself have a job right now, which is the building right here, and this is the museum where you can see all these, a part of the remains, but it includes definitely the entire body of Homo antecessor. Okay, so the last site I'd like to talk to, it's in southern Spain, in Norse, in the province of Granada. Different environment. We leave the cave now and we go to the open space into a Lacustrian alluvial basin developed during the Pliocene and Pleistocene. This is in the Iberic mountain range, the collision between the African and the Iberian plate. And in this slide, you can see the background. Those are Mesozoic, mostly Mesozoic rocks. And you see this plateau right here above the Pueblo. All these gray deposits are the Lacustrian, Pilastrian rocks infilling the basin. So maybe this slide is a little bit better. These rocks are flat lying, easy to correlate from side to side. And because of the younger incision, starting somewhat in the middle upper part of the Pleistocene, we have nice canyons and badlands along which we can do stratigraphic profiles and sampling. So overall, this is the reconstruction. It was a lake until sometime in the middle Pleistocene, as you can see in this slide. And there's a number of sites in this area as well. So you can see here, Fuente Nueva and Ventamicena, Barranco León, and so forth. All of these sites have provided either large mammal fauna, micro mammals as well, and some lithic tools as well. This is one of the sections. This is the site known as Barranco León, and you can see the incision I just mentioned. So more than 40 meters deep canyons or creeks, if you will. In mid-2000, we reported the first human tooth, the deciduous tooth, that was found in Barranco León, and you can see a nice slide here. We combined magnetostratigraphy and ESR to place in time this human tooth. This is Barranco León. You also have a spectacular large mammals remains like these tusks from Mammuthus meridionalis, mammoth, basically. Those are several meters long, extremely well preserved in the site of Fuentenueva. And for many years, what happens is that we only were able to find reverse polarity as the ones you observe in this section. You can see the negative latitude of VGP, excuse me. Anyway, so our efforts were precisely to find some change of polarity and combine those with ESR to better constrain the age of this fossil. For this reason, we logged a new section. As shown in this diagram, the red line is the lower part. This part, it's for the most part siliciclastic sediments. And then there's this sharp change in sedimentation. This cliff is produced by limestone, which allow us to move laterally and finish the section through the limestones all the way to the top of the section. Some close up as well here of the carbonates. For the most part, they were drilled in this section. We used the Jacob stuff, old-fashioned stuff to do the stratigraphy and the sampling, and those are my colleagues Dave and Claudia from Lehigh University. In this slide, you can see the sample that we took for electron spin resonance. Because it's light sensitive, we use metal tubes that we hammer into the sediment. And later on, as I explained, we extract the quartz grains in the dark to measure their last exposure to sunlight. And even though the large error and the uncertainties that it produced, it's enough to play, so to speak, to finish this match game between the magnetic polarity, our local magnetic polarity stratigraphy, to the GPTS. Some Zeidel diagrams, rocks are typically weaker here. The intensities, especially in the Lacustrian, in the limestones, in the carbonates, magnetization is weaker, sometimes unstable, sometimes demagnetization cannot be completed because either there's periods of magnetization or simply because it's too weak for even a cryogenic magnetometer. Samples are dominantly paramagnetic, but still a small contribution of ferromagnetism, as you can see from this demagnetization of the remnants. So this is the results for this section expressed in terms of the latitude of the virtual geomagnetic poles. The entire section is dominantly reverse, except that we find 5 polarity changes. The very top, the section ends with a normal polarity, which we interpret as Jaramillo. We have a normal polarity zone, which we interpret as the Cup Mountain. And there is another polarity zone here that it corresponds entirely to these faces, to these marls. And because the change of polarity just coincides with the change of lithostratigraphy, we think that this is an artifact. Those are recent remagnetization, a sub-recent remagnetization. Therefore, we are not considering this crown as a primary magnetization. Fortunately, we don't have full tests to test this. What we did, though, trying to push the envelope further, is to apply some rock magnetic cyclostratigraphy, something that we've done in the past with my colleagues Ken Kodama, Dave, Anastasia, and so forth. And in here specifically, we sampled the lower part of the section. Why the lower part? Because it's made of siliciclastic rocks. From this height and above, it's mostly Palastrian, Lacustrian. So we use the siliciclastic unit, which what's known as the middle member, to sample every 25 centimeters and measure both the bulk susceptibility and the ARM. When we do time series analysis, we identify 3 cycles that we interpret as the short eccentricity, or E1 in this diagram, obliquity, and the periodicity here, producing an average accumulation rate of about almost 19 centimeters per kilo a year. Now, that means that we have a rough estimate for the accumulation rate for the middle member, as shown in this diagram, and we can use the magnetic reversals for the upper part of the section, for the upper member or the carbonates, based on the Cup Mountain N2 and based on the Jaramillo N3. And you can see how the sedimentation rate is decreasing upwards, something on the other hand expected just looking at the lithophases of this section. Now we complemented this study with a borehole, and so that's what you see on top of the section right here. This is the drill machine. That's the guy that you see in here, and we drilled about 40 meters from the surface, and then we drill 40 more meters from this height where the photo is taken, 40 more meters to obtain a total of 80 meters of continuous sediment. Well, why? First of all, precisely to have continuous sediment, but to have it also fresh, not weathered sediment, in order to measure the same properties: paleomagnetism, inclination only based, susceptibility, anisotropy, FRX, ARX, you name it. Some illustrations here of this, I would call it quite successful operation. This is just came out of the oven, so to speak. This is the lithostratigraphy of the two boreholes. And as far as the physical properties, I only put here the long core, the continuous susceptibility measured with the geotech, but also we sampled every 10 centimeters to measure the susceptibility. You see a high or an increase between 50 and 65 meters depth, where we find the red clays, which is the lower part of the middle member. So it's consistent with the lithostratigraphy. Anyway, this is just came out of the oven. We still don't have the paleomagnetism for this section. So anyway, I don't want to do it longer, but I just like to comment a couple things. And I like to highlight the power of combining both methods, paleomagnetism and ESR or OSL. Trapped charge dating, so ESR luminescence, of course, this method is not exempt of issues such as the dose rate, whether one takes the in situ dose or based on the bulk sediment. There's the issue of the water content, the burial depth, and so on. But still, we can get numerical edges precise enough to play or to match, to anchor our binary code to the GPDS. Paleomagnetism, of course, it's not perfect neither. I mean, primary versus secondary magnetization, especially in rocks that are flat-lying, like our example here, that's always an issue. We don't have fault tests whatsoever, and it's always inevitably, it provides a binary code. So both of them are great complementary dating methods. One, furnishing the last exposure dating, ESR luminescence, versus paleomagnetism, which is the depositional age itself. So, well, most of us in here, we do paleomagnetism, but those are the main advantages, right? Magnetic reversals are global. Pretty much every single kind of rock gets magnetized. On the other hand, we only have this binary code, normal and reverse, positive and negative, and that the last reversal occurred 0.78 million years ago. And since I started with emphasizing the why of all this, and the why was the Homo dispersal out of Africa, just to comment on this map, which is a reconstruction for the uppermost Pleistocene, by the way, of the Western Mediterranean. I think we have enough solid data to say that this hominin presence in Western Mediterranean, in Europe, in fact, it dates back to the early Pleistocene. I'm not going to discuss, but it's unequivocally there, the reasons of these exodus or migrations out of Africa. Well, recently has been pointed out to either periods of extreme climate variability, the role of the eccentricity peaks, and so forth. So a climatic force, if you will, but there's other possible ideas or forces, if you will, that include the social competition. In other words, groups that would be more advanced as far as controlling more advanced lithic tools, Julian tools, versus groups that they will get, if you will, stuck with the primitive tools such as the old Hawaiian stone tools. And I'll stop with this interesting sentence by the famous scientist Galilei. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Josep. That was a very, very interesting presentation. I think we should all give Josep a big round of applause, virtual applause for that. And with that, I think I will open the floor to questions. I think there'll probably be quite a few. And if not, I certainly have some. So feel free to raise your hands or ask a question in the chat. A little bit.
Eric, congratulations. Eric says, good presentation. I don't know who he is.
Thank you.
So, well, I could break the ice with one question.
Sure.
This method, you mentioned the electrospin resonance. How far can you go in time? It's
Well,
only for exposition, right? Like
technically, you could go back to 2-3 million years. It all depends, to a large extent, it depends on the dose, right? Too much radioactivity saturates the signal too quick. If it's too weak, the other way around. In our experience, we get good results, as you obviously have seen in Algeria, 2.5 million years. So that's still a good time range for this method. I would say that we have good examples around 200K back to this 2.5 million years. But again, it all depends. It's a complicated, there are a lot of things in the equation, but the dose rate, it's a critical one, you know.
okay, thank you.
Mm.
We have a question from Lisa Tokes.
Oh, hi, Lisa.
Hi. Yeah, great talk. Really
Hey.
exciting. I was just curious about ESR on and a lot of time we aren't, I mean, how much exposure and what happens if it's inside your mouth? I mean, do you still get a good record?
Sorry, I got frozen for a second. You were wondering about quartz grains in the mouth, or?
Well, no, I mean your teeth
okay, the teeth.
are generally exposed to sunlight unless you're like, I don't know. So what role does it play? I'm just curious.
Yeah, no, that's you know, it's a good point. I did a very too quick introduction survival kit for the ESR. In this case, the assumption is that our teeth are free of uranium and thorium, so that they do not receive any radioactivity. When teeth are buried, so they're covered or nearby a radioactive source such as clay, then it's when the tooth is able to start accumulating these crystal defects. So it doesn't matter the previous history, well, unless obviously you have been exposed to a high radioactive field, but that's pretty much not the case.
What if they die in the cave?
If they die in the cave, that's okay. Because again, as long as the teeth they really like to incorporate uranium in their lattice. So again, as long as we don't have, when we are alive, it doesn't matter where you die. Yeah.
Okay, I get it. All right,
It's
thanks.
yeah, okay. So the clock will start again when it starts receiving this radioactive dose.
Okay. Thank you.
Welcome.
Yeah, I guess I have a further question from that. Again, people feel free to raise your hands or ask it in the chat. But so just to get an understanding of this, the ESR dating is effectively, it's like a measurement of the defects in the crystal structure from your material that you're dating having experienced the dose. So it accumulates with time rather than decaying with time.
That is correct.
Okay. Yes.
That is correct. Yeah, the longer it stays in its spot, so as long as it keeps receiving this radioactivity, it keeps accumulating these defects. So basically we measure the amount of defects, which is proportional to the amount of time that this grain has been receiving the radioactivity.
Mhm.
In the case of quartz, of course, the uranium, for example, the uranium within the quartz, it's already playing an important role as well as the surrounding sediment.
Mhm. Does that differ for quartz grains versus teeth or with the material that you have, or is it, there's a calibration for each material, or is it just, yeah, the same?
The measurements are totally different. On the one hand, for quartz, we need to measure the liquid nitrogen temperature. On the other hand, teeth preparation is much more tedious. We need to separate the animal. So the measurements is the same machine, sample prep, totally different. One requires liquid nitrogen. And actually, the main issue is that not always it's possible to get a hold of mammal teeth. Only certain type of teeth are good for ESR. Ironically, human teeth are very good, but paleoanthropologists are kind of a little bit reluctant to give away precious human tooth. So that was a unique case in Atapuerca when we were able to use a fragment of a human tooth.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome.
There's no further questions at the moment. Then I will tell everyone again to give another round of applause because that was a great talk. And
I think there is one question, Brandon, in the chat.
In the chat?
Or it's
Yes,
just a
I do see a
comment.
question now. Yes, thank you. It says, "Hi, Josep. Did the human fossils in North Algeria, Orthe, and Burgos appear in a time sequence to form a migration routine of humans? Is H. antecessor in Burgos a totally different species from those found in Orthe or North Algeria?"
Yeah. Well, honestly, we don't really know. We don't. If our hypothesis based on the Burgos finding is correct, at some point we would need to find some sort of equivalent antikythera, if you will, in Northern Africa. But again, we have more question marks and disconnections than anything else. We don't really know. In North Africa, which the chronologies are much older, 2.5, we don't even know the people behind the tools. We haven't found any fragment of human fossils. In Orce, we have some remnants of human fossils as well as in Atapuerca. But the information is still too sparse to make any hypothesis.
All right. Yeah. Let's give Josep another round of applause in that case. It's great. Thank you once again.
Thanks for coming.
The final thing, which is that our next speaker will be on the 19th of March. And you can find all of our seminars on YouTube. So if you missed anything, you can catch up there. And with that, I think we can stop recording and move on to the portion of this where we're just kind of having an informal catch up. So anyone who wants to stick around can, anyone who wants to go, feel free to leave.